A very good morning. My name is Professor Martin Meyer. I'm the Dean and Head of the University of Aberdeen Business School. Today I'm really pleased to welcome so many of you to our inaugural In Conversation with event. On the first Wednesday of every month, the Business School will host conversations with business leaders on topics including sustainability, entrepreneurship and energy transition. We are really excited to be virtually joined by so many alumni, students, business leaders and colleagues. Can I just remind you that this event is being recorded? We would really want you to join our conversation, so do feel free to ask questions using the question and answer box. Now, without further ado, I would like you to introduce Colette Backwell, CEO of Clan Cancer Support. Today, we will be discussing what is your why. Colette, a very, very warm welcome. Thanks for finding the time to join us. Let us start by me just asking you to introduce yourself and tell us in a few words a bit more about you as a person and a bit of your story.
Good morning, Martin, and good morning everyone who's joined us today. Thank you first of all for the invitation to participate in this inaugural event, so I'm very honoured to have been asked to do the first one. I'm currently the Chief Executive of Clan Cancer Support. I've been there for 6 years, but that's following quite a long and varied career across all different sectors. I started off life in Northern Ireland as a research scientist, did my PhD at Queen's, came to Scotland, worked at the Rout Research Institute for a number of years, and then I joined the civil service in the Chief Scientist's office. From there, I moved into the policy side and became a senior civil servant managing various policy areas in both the UK and Scottish governments for over a period of about 15 years. I then moved into the private sector as the director of the Food and Drink Federation in Scotland, where I represented the food and drink manufacturing industry in Scotland, and that was everything from large multinationals through to SMEs. And then 6 years ago, I came to Clan Cancer Support, and it's been quite an interesting journey, particularly with the last year, and I'm sure everyone would agree with that.
Well, thank you for that. This is a massive journey, an amazing CV. So let's dive in and let me ask, what shaped you to be the leader you are today?
I think it's a combination of some of the things I've just mentioned, Martin. Growing up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles in the 70s and the 80s, I think led to a level of deep-seated resilience that has stayed with me ever since. My mother was a great believer in it didn't matter what life throws at you, just get up and get on. And I think that's probably at my core. But I think more importantly, because I've moved a bit and because I've worked in different sectors and I've worked at different levels, I've been very fortunate to work with a variety of different leaders. Some of them really, really good and some of them really not so good. And I think what's shaped me is learning from that, watching, listening and learning and taking the best of that to apply to what I do.
That's really insightful. Often when you ask people why they're doing what they're doing, it's about making a difference in people's life. Why, in your opinion, should we do so?
Well, why would we not? I mean, I think many of us are very fortunate to have careers that we enjoy. Others are not so fortunate. Some of us have had good life experiences and some of us haven't. And I think what's kind of shaped me to make a difference in people's lives was partly because as a PhD student and as a research scientist, as many of the people today will understand, that's an environment in which each generation of researchers supports the next generation and you learn from the generation ahead of you. And it was that being united in the same cause, sharing an interest in a particular area of research or in a particular disease or whatever it happened to be. And it taught me the importance of supporting those around me and the value of being supported by them, not just professionally, but also personally. And I think that culture of mutual support has stayed with me right throughout my career.
That's great. Can I ask you, can you remember the first time you really made a positive impact on people around you? Is there a specific event you might be able to share with us?
I think you can reflect on this, and obviously you would think about different things on different days and different circumstances. But just going back to that research environment, I was pretty strapped for cash when I was a PhD student. By that stage, we were married and had 2 kids and a mortgage, and I was doing a PhD, etc., etc. So I made some extra cash by tutoring medical students. And what I learned from that was that many people are actually held back by a lack of self-belief rather than a lack of ability or knowledge. And it was simply a case of giving them positive feedback and encouragement, and that allowed them to reach their potential just through their own efforts. It was nothing I was doing particularly, other than reflecting back at them that actually they knew what they were doing, they knew what to say, they knew what to write, they just didn't have the confidence to do it. And that was hugely satisfying. I think just seeing that with just a conversation with someone for half an hour or an hour, that they could go away and achieve, something quite special as a result of that.
This leads us nicely to culture, the environment of where we work in. How important do you think are values in an organization, in the workplace?
I think for me, they're crucially important. It's always been very important to me to work somewhere where I felt that the values of the organization sort of matched my own. And in fact, I have moved on from some positions because the value and the culture just weren't right for me. That's not to say the culture was necessarily bad, but it just wasn't right for me. At Clan, I think, is probably where I've spent most time sort of thinking about this. A shared value, a shared vision leads to cohesion around the values and the vision, and that helps everybody pull in the same direction. It also allows you to reflect back to people what are good behaviours that fit with the values and actually what are bad behaviours that don't fit with the values, and that can help to manage difficult situations at times.
Well, that's a really good point. Given the importance of values in an organization, so how do you go about inspiring your workforce to follow these values?
I think inspiring anybody, whether it's an individual or a workforce, or even your family or your colleagues, whoever you happen to be with, is the crucial point is always about communication, so that people understand where you're going. It's that going back to that shared vision, that shared purpose. Why are we here, and what are we here to do? At Clan, the way that we got buy-in to the values was that we genuinely worked together to develop those values. We put a lot of time and a lot of sessions and a lot of yellow post-its. Do you remember back in the day when we could actually go into a room and put post-its on a wall? So we spent a lot of time actually working together on what our values should be for the organisation, how those values would translate into how we work with cancer patients and their families, but equally importantly, how those values related to us as colleagues and how we treated each other with that value set. So as a result of that quite lengthy process, everybody understands what the values are. They feel they've bought into them because they've actually helped to develop them. And as we return from COVID and start to rebuild after the horrible year that we've all had, we will go back to those values and revisit those just to remind everybody what we were before this all happened, how those values have kind of united us through this last 12 months, and how we can build on that as we move forward.
That's great. We spoke a bit earlier about your career, and you have worked in various places, stretching various sectors, from research to the third sector. Do you think there are key differences between these sectors, or do you think it's possible to make a positive impact on the organization and people around you, no matter what sector it is?
I think I've thought a lot about this because I've actually been asked to speak on a few occasions about the differences between this sector and that sector and what was it like working here as opposed to there. And just to give you an example of that, when I first came to Clan, I was asked to speak at a business event where the question was, can you tell us the differences between working in a food and drink industry company and in a charitable business? And I did the thing that I often do, which is to kind of mind map everything. And really the only real difference that I could focus in on was that the purpose was different, and that what the organizations produced was different, but the means by which you get there is pretty much the same. And the principles of good leadership and team building, values and visions, having a clear strategy, focusing around a common purpose are the same, I think, wherever you work. And I think when you're in a very large organization like a civil service department, it might sometimes feel that it's harder to make an impact because you're very, very far from the front line, I suppose. But it's always possible to make an impact in your own environment, even if that's just helping a colleague out or helping someone else to develop their career.
Well, that really leads us nicely to my next question. Making a difference is not always about big changes. It's about making small changes in the day-to-day life. What could these small changes be in your view? Could you give us some examples, perhaps?
Yeah, I think one I'd like to highlight, I think it's always possible to make changes in the way that we do things. And I've been very fortunate in my career to work for organizations that invested heavily in coaching and mentoring. And my first coaching experience was about 20 years ago, when I was still relatively young and able to benefit from it, I suppose, at that point. And what I learned so much from that. I learned the power of coaching, the power of mentoring, the power of being mentored. And actually the thing I think I took away from that more than anything was two things. One is that it's very, very easy to be held back by fear. I think we all feel that, whether we admit it or not. I think we all feel that, particularly professionally, that fear of failure, that fear of letting people down, that fear of not making profit, whatever it happens to be. And there is this line from what some might consider not a very good sort of self-help book, but it's a good thing to focus on, which is feel the fear and do it anyway. And it's about pushing yourself through that fear. You can decide at the start of your day what kind of a day you're going to have just by thinking about how you're going to deal with the challenges you have that day. And you can decide whether you're going to do that in a positive way or a negative way. It's not always easy to do, but it's a good place to start from. We can choose to make a difference, even if it's just a small incremental change. Every step forward is a step forward, no matter how small that is. And it's important just to kind of take those positives where you can, particularly, you know, when you think about this last 12 months and what we've all had to face and the different ways that we've had to work. You know, as a charity, we lost 70% of our income overnight. The team around me just embraced that, picked that up, and changed the way that they related to each other because everything became virtual. They changed the way they raised income. They changed the way they delivered services. But they just got up and got on with it. It was absolutely phenomenal to watch. And I think that's when you can see what's at people's core, that ability to just take a really difficult situation and say, okay, I can't do that now. What can I do instead? So I think it's always possible to do that, Martin.
Well, thanks. We got a question from a member in the audience, and Gary McEwen asks, how do you deal with a very high-performing team member who doesn't fit the organization culturally?
Oh, Gary, thank you for a real stinker. That's a very good question. I think that's really, really interesting. I mean, a high-performing individual can sometimes be more trouble than they're worth. I think you have to really go back to what I said earlier about the vision and values of an organization, and do they fit the culture? Are they they may be performing in terms of what they're there to do, but in doing that, they may be disrupting their colleagues, they may be causing difficulties elsewhere. And I think you have to performance manage that in the way that you would any other performance issue. In this particular case, in my opinion, and others may disagree, I think it's the value to the organisation in terms of what they're there to do professionally is equal to the value that they have as a member of the team and helping the culture and the values to be embedded across the organisation. So poor performance is poor performance, and it may be poor performance against the values as opposed to poor performance against what the organisation is there to achieve. I hope that's answered the question, Gary.
It definitely has. Thank you. We got another question from Lucia, and that reflects more the current environment. And her question is, how will Clan adapt to the changing high street environment? You refer to all the challenges we've gone through.
Sure.
More recently.
So I mean, that specifically is probably to do with the fact that we have a number of charity shops which collectively account for just short of a quarter of our income. I mean, charity shops are a hugely valuable income stream to any charity. So it's a really good question, and I have to say this was not placed. So thanks for asking it, Lucia. What we've done during the last 12 months is to take the opportunity of some of the downtime that we've had, which has given us time to reflect on what was good about the business before and how we might adapt that to the future. So specifically in terms of the change in the high street, you'll see an advert soon actually. We're just about to advertise for someone to come and work with us on e-commerce. So we've already put the framework in place to be able to do online sales. So we'll keep the high street shops that we have because they're always very popular, but we're also going to move into online sales. Alongside that, I mean, that's specifically to do with the retail side. We realise there's a huge opportunity there, but we've learned a lot about the use of digital technology in relating to each other as we are this morning, but actually in terms of what we do in supporting cancer patients and their families, we had to very, very quickly adapt to, first off, telephone support, which was easy to put in place. But within a couple of weeks, we were using digital technology to provide support for people, whereas previously that would have been face-to-face. And we're not going to stop that. We're going to continue with a hybrid model for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is that we support a geography which is predominantly remote, rural and island communities. So by being able to use digital technology, we can actually reach more people over a much wider geography than we could previously. So we're going to extend our reach using digital technology over the coming period.
That's really helpful. We got another question from the audience. Are there activities that Clan has stopped doing and won't be able to restart when we move more to the normal way of doing business again, when normal numbers return to Clan House, given that many of your users will have shielded and might not want to return or may not be able to for all sorts of reasons, lack of funds, health-wise.
That's a really important point, and you know, up until well, there are two parts of Clan's business, I think, which we've had to deal with quite separately. Clan Haven in Aberdeen is an accommodation facility for cancer patients who are come from quite far away to have their treatment at Aberdeen Hospital. And we stayed open all the way through the pandemic because radiotherapy and chemotherapy clearly had to continue, even if it was on smaller numbers than previously. So we had to adapt the facility to allow people to shield in their rooms. So we closed for a month. We adapted the premises so that people could actually have some limited ability to cook for themselves in their rooms. It was just very simple, just having microwaves and so on. And through that, we've been able to keep 15 to 20 people every single week, and it's open every night of the year, we've continued to do that right throughout the pandemic. So that the pandemic just meant that we had to morph, we had to change, we had to just pivot into a slightly way of doing business. The rest of our kind of offering to cancer patients prior to COVID was really predicated on face-to-face support. That's what people valued, and they still value. And of course, the pandemic has meant quite rightly that cancer patients have shielded. And so we have been using online and telephone support, and obviously using MS Teams and Zoom to kind of keep in touch with people and to provide that vital support. But from around, I would say around Christmas time, we've had an increasing demand for face-to-face, and we can do that because we support vulnerable individuals. It's quite legitimate for us to continue to do what we do. So we've been, again, it's all about adapting, and it's about thinking, well, I can't do it that way, how can I do it? So recently we've been able to introduce walk and talk groups, so people can go outside and go for a walk and receive support that way. We've got a really nice garden at Clan, so we've been able to facilitate some meetings outside. We've also got some really big spaces which are well ventilated, so we've been able to provide face-to-face support in that way. But we fully expect, and we've been talking to our clients about this, we fully expect that as the vaccination programme proceeds, that more and more people will want to come back. And they phone us every day saying, when are you going to start doing this? When are you going to start doing that? So at the moment, it's a hybrid. We're continuing with the digital work and the online support and the telephone support. But over time, we fully expect to be able to get back to a version of what we did before, having used the intervening months to refine it and come back as a new and improved way of doing things, as opposed to maybe perhaps some of the things we were less happy about before. And I think we'll reflect on this period of time as a time of opportunity. I don't think we're ready to do that yet, but I think we'll look back and say, well, if it hadn't been for COVID, we wouldn't have done that. It's accelerated change, and I think it's made us all think about how we work and how we relate to each other. And I don't think that will change. I think we'll keep a lot of the good learning from the pandemic.
Yeah, that's really important. We got another question from the audience. Nazmul Farouk wants to know, based on your experience, and this leads us probably into a slightly different area. Are we ready to adopt AI and ML in our day-to-day life and business environment?
Oh gosh, well, I'm no expert, but yeah. I think it was AI and what was the other one?
AI and ML. I guess it's artificial intelligence and machine learning.
I don't know anything about machine learning, so I'm not going to even try to take that one on. If anyone else is out there who can help me, please do. But certainly with artificial intelligence, I think definitely that is something that we will be seeing more and more. And we already do. You know, we encounter it every day. Sometimes we don't even know we're encountering it, but it does have a place. I mean, I'm no expert in this area, but just to give you an example of innovation. In the world of cancer, this 12 months has led to a lot of innovation, which I think will accelerate the pace of change going forward. It meant that specialists and the hospitals had to really think about how do we help this person with their cancer when we can't do that, just back to my earlier point. And out of that, I think, has come some really good technological change. And one of the applications of AI is that, for example, in breast cancer screening, at the moment, all of the mammograms have got to be read by a person to assess whether the woman should be recalled to the breast cancer clinic. But there's now AI technology which is actually scanning these and doing a first sift, which means that the whole process is speeding up, which means that we're more likely to get early diagnosis. And I think that's just phenomenal. And there'll be so much more of that, I think, over the coming years, which has got to be good. The earlier we diagnose cancer, the better outcomes people will have. So bring it on.
Great. We spoke now quite a bit about Clan, about other factors influencing your work potentially. Let's go back to yourself again. You spoke about the importance of coaching, mentoring, and about the changes we can all make in our work lives. looking back on your career, what do you think has been the most life-changing, impactful moments of your own career?
It was very much that point at which I first experienced coaching and mentoring, which was when it was my first policy position in the senior civil service. I was in DEFRA, the department at the time. It was actually MAF when I joined, but it became DEFRA subsequently. And some of you will remember foot and mouth in 2001, and the Tony Blair government wasn't long in power at that point in time, and they basically decided that the department I was working in was, in the minister's words, a basket case department. That was quite a damning indictment from your boss. But what they decided to do was to really heavily invest in the department. There was a name change, a new permanent secretary, and the money that they put into the department was focused on not a development centre for staff, but an assessment centre. And we all had a letter that said, you're going to go through this assessment centre, you're going to be assigned a personal coach, and one outcome might be that you don't work here any longer. I mean, that's quite a stark moment in your life when you receive a letter like that. I was fortunate to have not been there very long, and I benefited hugely from that. I was very fortunate to be working with my director at the time was a woman called Sonia Fippard, an absolutely incredible lady, and a really powerful example of someone who is a high performer, but absolutely has that core sense of values and the ability to empower those around them to actually be the best that they can be. So working with her, going through that program, having a mentor, it was just the most powerful experience of my life. And it taught me that thing which I referred to early on, which was that what was holding me back actually was fear and a lack of self-belief. And once you get to that point where you think, actually, I can have a go at this, it's hugely liberating. And I just don't think I've looked back since then, Martin. And I would encourage anyone who is at a point in their career or even in their life where they're not quite sure where they're headed, get yourself a coach or a mentor. It's one of the most powerful experiences you'll ever have.
Great. What advice would you give to anyone who's interested in becoming a mentor?
Well, I think there's something I've learned from being a mentor and a mentee, which is that the cultural fit and the chemistry between the mentor and the mentee is really, really important. And it's okay to meet someone and actually say, I don't think this is going to work for us. Maybe you should look for someone who has this skill set or whatever. It's okay to say this isn't going to work right up front. But once you get into that relationship, it's a confidential and quite powerful relationship. And I think mentors need to be able to communicate openly, but most importantly, they need to have the ability to listen and offer constructive challenge. And don't judge your mentees. Let the mentees make their own decisions, just with a little bit of a steer from you.
Thank you. Final question from myself. So what is your why?
Well, you made me think about this in inviting me this morning, and I think my why is just the constant quest to learn something new. And I think that's probably why I've changed sectors and I've changed jobs. I just love knowledge. I love learning. I think every day you can learn something new, but then you have to decide to yourself, well, what am I going to do with that? What can I do with that? So that's my why. My why is what's out there? What more can I learn? And what can I make with that? What can I do with that?
What a lovely answer to that question. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, the time is up and we need to bring the event to a close. Once more, thank you so much, Colette, for sharing your story and your passion for making the world a better place. Let me thank also the audience for coming in with interesting, challenging questions. Thank you again for everyone who joined us. We hope to see you again at the next event of the series in conversation with Gary McEwen. What can you learn from startups? Will happen on Wednesday, the 2nd of June. So let me close by leaving you attendees with a question. What is your why? Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye.